You know ID in the town all day. ID in the SEA. You know ID in the town all day. ID in the SEA.
Hello and welcome to episode 398 of the fabulous Peltoncast, sponsored by our friends at Pagliacci Pizza. I'm your co-host, Kevin Pelton.
And I'm Tristan Carcino.
And we're coming to you in separate locations this week. I'm in Seattle, Washington, home of the college football playoff finalist Huskies.
And I'm coming here from Redmond, Washington, home of the Super Bowl 48 champion Seattle Seahawks. You are way too chipper right now.
Look,
there is nothing to be chipper about, good sir. We can still look fondly back on a Huskies season or the Seahawks playing games and not be chipper like that.
When the football season has come to an end for both of them. Somehow not with a loss for the Seahawks, but boy, did it sure feel like it, even though they technically won the game. I don't know. I mean, the number of people...
Sometimes a win is a loss.
Well, that's a fair point. The number of people who were posting kind of the Huskies, I forget exactly what the social media post was, but everyone posted on Instagram about, just what a great season it was and all the memories. Like, that definitely got to me. And I've had a solid 24 plus hours to rationalize here.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, I we'll talk about the Huskies at the very end of this podcast because I got no good rationalization left.
Oh, jeez.
I've got only darkness now.
Well, I mean, I will say, like, there's a lot of people...
We're going to be at opposite ends of the spectrum, so I guess that's good. That's always fun.
There are a lot of people who are like, how do they make sure that getting to the final isn't the high point of the Kalen DeBoer era? I'm like, guys... That probably is going to be the high point of...
There's only one other point to get to.
It's not, yeah. There's really not that much more studio space to explore. They could win more games in the college football playoff going forward than just the one that they did this year. So I guess that they got that going for them.
I think that the playoff structure changing is going to radically change how we talk about college football. In fact,
of course, it's going to make all the things we once celebrated completely and utterly meaningless.
Beating Oregon is never completely and utterly
fair.
Meaningless. Thank you.
Beating Oregon
twice. Jake Browning pointing at Oregon, I think, actually might be the greatest moment in UW history.
I'll hear the argument.
We can talk about that later. That's not for right now. We're not talking about the Huskies right this second.
We are not. Let's start with our toast because we got a lot to get to. A congratulations to the Kraken's all-star representative, because every team has to have one. Oliver
They're
Brooks.
Not that bad. That was like Mariners level, like Bill Swift, I guess. Like
that's Cy Young Award winner Bill Swift. I mean, obviously not with the
I don't know. Who do you
Mariners,
think is the most pathetic Mariners all-star participant? It must have been more like Jose Vidro, apparently, or something.
This is a terrific question that we should have done on the podcast at some point, and I'm sure the listener who is much more familiar with the dark years of Mariners history immediately.
I'm guessing, but I don't think anything pre-90 counts or something like that. Like, I mean, maybe it does, but it's just a different team after that. But after the kind of initial playoff bound version of the Mariners, it had to have come in the year like 2004 through the year 2020.
Do you know that Brandon League was an all-star for the Mariners?
That might be it.
I mean, but he wasn't the automatic representative. They had 3 all-stars that year. Felix made it, and Michael Pineda. Okay. So
yeah. See, they always had Felix during that time period,
and Ichiro. Kind of so they did not really have.
So Ichiro is the worst Mariners all-star. He somehow elected like 11 times. No, they never had like completely devoid of any talent.
And I love this guy. I wish to speak no ill of him, but Daniel Vogelbach. Rocking the 208 batting average when he was an all-star in 2019. I think that's got to be the modern answer here.
Man.
I don't know probably enough. I mean, I recognize the names of the players who were all-stars for the Mariners in the 80s, so they couldn't have been that bad in all likelihood.
It's Bogey Burgers. I think you're probably right on that one.
Yeah, the listener can weigh in if I'm wrong, but with all due respect, Mariners may have traded for a better version of Daniel Vogelbach earlier this week or last week.
I mean, he got DFA'd by the team. Not that old. He got DFA'd by the team.
Anyways, every team in the NHL has to have an all-star. To me, Vince Dunn
he's been
was
on so many teams since the Mariners designated for assignment. before he caught on with the Mets.
To me, Vince Dunn was the pick, but the Discord did not feel like it was clear. Bjorkstrand, a first-time All-Star who ranks second on the Kraken in both goals and assists. So congrats to Oliver Bjorkstrand. Congrats to Seahawks defensive tackle Leonard Williams, who, like, somebody was making history for the Seahawks even on defense on Sunday by virtue of his midseason trade after the Seahawks bye week, became the first player since 1930 to play 18 games in a season, is noted by Pro Football Reference. This was something I observed when he was traded to the Seahawks, but then had completely forgotten about.
I think a lot of people forgot about it until like after the game.
Yeah.
Going in, it wasn't a news story.
When I looked this up when the trade first happened, there was someone who had a chance to do it last season and was like very upset about the possibility, like having to play an 18th game and not getting a bye week, which Leonard Williams expressed nothing but being cool with it. And then that player subsequently missed the end of the season due to injury, so did not have a chance to do it.
Could have used that bye week. Anyway, Leonard Williams, dog though. Love Leonard Williams.
Yeah, not the problem. Lastly this week, we're wishing a fond farewell to original sounder Osvaldo Alonso, who announced his retirement at age 38 after 15 seasons in MLS, most recently with Atlanta United. Played the first 10 of those seasons with the Sounders, winning 4 U.S. Open Cups, the Supporters Shield in 2014, and the first MLS Cup in 2016 before being part of the team that lost the MLS Cup final in 2017. Alonso's 10 career goals and 13 assists for the Sounders in MLS League play don't do justice to his impact defensively in the midfield, where he earned the nickname Honey Badger. He was a 4-time All-Star, part of the league's best 11 in 2012, and we certainly should have mentioned him when we recently were talking about the Sounders.
Yeah, I was going to say, was
Rushmore.
he not? Did we not chat about Ozzy Alonso as part of the Mount Rushmore?
I blanked on that one. I'm going to take the blame.
Okay.
So, nothing but love for Osvaldo Alonso, without question. All right, as we get into this quickly this week, we have the return for the first time, I think since mid-season, because we didn't do them at the end of the season. We just did a standard segment. It's time for your favorite segment.
This is a Seahawks take. I thought it was funny to hear Pete Carroll say that the end of the season that he's not worn out. He's not tired. Because you know who is worn out? Me and the rest of the Seahawks fan base, who watched a team miss the playoffs again, their second time in the last 3 years, and finish in the bottom third of point differential behind the Bears, the Colts, the Vikings, 3 of the closest teams to them in point differential. In fact, have already fired their head coach, something the Seahawks should be considering this offseason. And it was also funny to hear Pete say that the team is closer to the Super Bowl than they were a year ago. And I can only assume he means that literally, since Vegas is about 200 miles closer to Seattle than Glendale. Because by any other metric, this team is a lot closer to the Falcons than they are the Niners and the Ravens. It was a step backwards in basically every aspect of the game. And you know the best way to rebuild a roster? Through draft picks. But the Seahawks just lit a few of those on fire this year, a common behavior for Pete and John. Pick 47, one of the most valuable picks in the draft, just gone for a half a season of Leonard Williams on a move any aware fan knew at the time was awful. We called it, I believe, quote that. Now remind me how these front offices know more than fans. And then on Sunday, after the Bears lost in Lambeau, a 2-point conversion, 2 missed field goals, and boom, they're drafting 2 picks later for literally no reason. The Raiders and the Saints had better point differentials than the Seahawks and are getting better draft picks. They're in literally a worse head coaching situation than Dennis Allen and a guy who was a linebackers coach 2 months ago. We can now debate which of the many Seahawks big trades was the worst in Seahawks history. No, in NFL history. By comparison, they gave away picks and future assets the way Pete loves to give away games with punts. He is an exactly 500 coach in seasons without Russell Wilson. They lucked into a generational quarterback and an amazing young defense and managed to turn that into 1 Super Bowl and a number of high draft picks spent on running back. It was the Russell Wilson era. not Pete Carroll and John Schneider, because they have intentionally and repeatedly been stacking the deck against themselves via trades for future assets, allocation of resources, and poor decisions on the field. And you cannot win forever that way. Pete seems like a good deal, seems like a good dude, and honestly, a great representative of the city, but he's also a defensive-minded coach with a shitty defense. Without Russell Wilson is not a winner and has helped dismantle the hopes of the Seahawks' future. So I have a bit of career advice because I am worn out. Thanks for Devin Witherspoon and Pete Carroll. Retire, bitch.
All right, I guess we're getting into it right now. So
I didn't want to
Okay.
tell you that was the Seahawks take going.
you did keep it from me. You hit it well. I didn't even see the Pete Carroll retire bench coming. I gotta be honest. All right, let's unpack a few things. The Seahawks only moved down 2 spots in the draft by
It
winning the
doesn't
game.
matter. It doesn't matter.
The actual
Only moved down 2 spots in the draft. Who cares?
the actual
It's 2
thing,
spots for nothing.
I mean, I don't know that I necessarily wanted to see Pete Carroll pull all the starters. Had Matt Prater, Matt Prater, right? Simply made the final field goal after missing a much more makeable field goal on the previous possession to keep the Seahawks within one score.
I actually, this is not something that I'm that upset about because I do think the difference between the 14th pick and the 16th pick is virtually nothing when it comes to value. But you still control your position in the draft a little bit better at 14 than at 16. Your ability to trade down from there if a quarterback falls there or whatever, you give up some flexibility in the draft by having a lower draft pick there.
It would have been the most satisfying outcome if the offense had that drive, which was awesome. I mean, it is there's a dual-edged 2 sides of the coin with Geno Smith tying the record for fourth quarter comeback wins or comebacks on the final drive or whatever.
I don't know how that's mathematically possible.
It is wild that they actually did. I had forgotten how many of those were actually against good teams because you had this wasn't the fourth quarter comeback, but the Detroit win in overtime.
Well, the Eagles game wasn't Geno, but yeah.
And then the Philadelphia game without him, but also a couple of those drives were last second game winning drives to beat the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals, who both went 4-13 on the season.
I mean,
it's great.
The frustrating part about this is the Seahawks almost made the playoffs while being bad.
So I will push back on this a little bit. We're relying heavily on point differential. The Seahawks' schedule was very hard.
What regard? There's a bunch of metrics, and I'm on the opposite side of this argument.
I don't think
there
that they were
metrics that
bad
talk about this.
Team.
Was their DVOA amazing?
No, it was not amazing. It was far from amazing, but it was 16th. So it wasn't I think the comparison to the Bears and the Colts is a little bit going too far. The Colts were 20th in DVOA. They were 3.7% percentage points worse. The Bears were 7 percentage points worse. Those were teams that played substantially easier schedules than the Seahawks did. And also, just kind of the hidden factors that go into DVOA. Third downs in particular were not as favorable to those teams. So I don't think it's that the Seahawks are necessarily a bad team, but they are an average team that thinks they're right on the verge of, because not only did Pete Carroll say they're closer to the Super Bowl contention than they were a year ago he said that they were pretty close to the 49ers. So he already thought they were very close to the Super Bowl, and he thinks they've gotten closer somehow. I mean, that actually was not the quote that worried me the most.
Worried you the most?
Yeah,
it should have been all of it. It should have also been having Pete Carroll have the just total and complete leeway to decide whether he was coming back or not. I mean, Pete Carroll runs the franchise. He is the franchise at this point.
I don't think that first off, most teams have already made coaching changes if they plan to do this. And I don't think the Seahawks necessarily would have allowed him to go out there on Seattle
talking
Sports.
About it. But the way that he was talking about it wasn't we're going to have some conversations. It was Pete Carroll is coming back because Pete Carroll says he's coming back.
But Pete Carroll always said, I'm planning on coming back. That's different from what Jody Allen is planning, to be clear. Again, I don't think anything's happening, but that is different.
No, absolutely not. No. Pete Carroll's coming back as head coach.
But the worrisome thing to me, and we had a robust debate about this on the Discord where not everyone agreed with me, was him saying, like, when asked about the team as a whole, we played young. We made too many young guy kind of mistakes all the way across the board. It's a team that's growing. And it's that last part of it that is the context that suggests to me that Pete Carroll is viewing this is the reason that we fell short this season is because we weren't experienced enough. And as we add more experience, naturally we will get better. Now, not that he's not going to think about making any changes, because there are some other quotes that suggest he does. But if he thinks that the fundamental issue with the team was the youth, particularly given that the offense was pretty good, at times very good, that was the young side of the ball. The offense is legitimately young at the skill positions, with Jackson Smith and Jigba and Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet playing as much as they did. A pretty young offensive line, all things considered. Even with Geno Smith being an older quarterback, they are among the 10 youngest offenses. But on defense, where they were very bad, where they, did start, I think he thinks they're young because of the fact that Devin Witherspoon is young, Enrique Woolen is young, and some of the other cornerbacks are young. But at all the other positions, they're not young on defense and changed over a lot last year and got worse somehow and still have not been above average since 2017. And there, because of the fact that Bobby Wagner, was a big part of this, and Quandre Diggs, and even Leonard Williams is, 29, he's older than average. They were above average in terms of defensive age. And yet Pete Carroll thinks youth was their problem.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that that's wrong. Played young is such a strange thing to describe, because I think what he's saying is they didn't play the scheme particularly well. And they made a number of repeated mistakes when playing the scheme. And there were a number of breakdowns when playing the scheme. I mean, you saw it over and over and over again. There was a play that somebody had highlighted where it was just like, there's a 2-man route that the Cardinals ran, and there's like 5 Seahawks on one side of the field and 1 Seahawk near either of the routes. And it's just like, what is happening here? How could it have been this bad at this point in the season? And I think that's kind of what he's talking about, is there were just so many complete breakdowns in the secondary in particular, and at the linebackers in particular. So playing young is one thing, but to me that says the scheme is broken. That if this point in the season, you either have the exact wrong talent on the field, or the scheme doesn't make sense. If the players who have been in that scheme for that many games, for 17 games, are still having those breakdowns, the issue is the scheme more than it is the players, because these are highly paid players out there. These are players that the Seahawks have gone out and plucked and paid money to. So they either just missed on all of those mistakes. There's no answer that's the right answer because they are not young.
There's no answer that's the right answer because Pete Carroll has heavy involvement in picking the players.
But like, if they were an extraordinarily young defense, that would be the right answer. But that's what I'm saying. If that is that, but the thing is, they're not. So it's either you pick the wrong players or you have the wrong scheme. Right now, the defense,
you're communicating the scheme to them wrong. It's one of those things. But ultimately,
I will tell you, we'll probably talk about this on the Seahawks Year in Review podcast. I think Clint Hurd is probably gone, and we've talked about this over and over and over again. That it is the defensive coordinator changes, and it's like, at some point, something else has to change. It can't always be this same scheme or pray that you find these defenders that you're looking for, because something else has to happen along the way. And they found some good pieces, but if the other pieces aren't making sense within that scheme, it doesn't matter how good Devin Witherspoon is.
I mean, they ended up 28th in defensive DVOA, like near the very bottom of the league, after spending a top 5 pick on an impactful defender.
This is not a cheap defense.
After bringing back Bobby Wagner. Yeah, no, like, look, all this, it's just,
they have spent,
it's not acceptable results on
the defense. And obviously, like, I was thinking about a Uchenna Nwosu, because that injury, I think we maybe overlooked that just a little tiny bit, as far as like the pass rush got a lot worse after his injury. But at the same time, like, there are teams who are missing players throughout the year. If it's a Uchenna Nwosu, who's like the difference between you having a good defense and a bad defense, you have a bad defense. And that to me is just like, there's literally not a scheme in place that can work with almost anybody. If you have spent this much money and this much resources on these players, if what you need is the most elite level talent across the board and you're unable to get that, then you have to figure something else out. And the Seahawks have not. That the fact that they got worse at defense throughout the year, I think was a little shocking to me. And I think they also, because of how teams played against them, I think they deluded themselves and the quarterbacks that they played along the way into thinking that they had a good defense. I believed it too. I believed that there was a good defense in there because there were some big plays that happened, but like their inability to turn the ball over late in the season, to their inability to stop the run, is just like, they're not that young in the defensive line. Jaron Reed didn't play on Sunday, but Jaron Reed played against the Steelers. Jaron Reed ain't that young. Leonard Williams ain't that young. Dre Jones ain't that young. So like Bobby Wagner, obviously, Jordan Brooks, these players are players who are going on to their second or third contracts. There's literally no answer. The only thing that can be done, I mean, they can go make some moves in free agency, but as far as a complete overhaul of the defense, there's not a chance of doing that right now. If you're going to run it back with mostly the same group, something else needs to change.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say, to his credit, Pete Carroll brought in a number of outside voices when Clint Hurt became defensive coordinator. I boldly predicted a prediction that I continue to feel good about, that Sean Desai would be the next defensive coordinator for the Seahawks after his scapegoating in Philadelphia, and how poorly that has gone with the Eagles defense collapsing even worse under Matt Patricia. Like the Eagles collapse defensively actually makes me feel better about the Seahawks defense. That's how badly the Eagles have collapsed. Sean Desai did nothing wrong, but it's still too much of the same. And it, to the extent that they did change things, that also did not work.
I wish they could hire Dan Quinn.
I mean, I
I
think
would
we all
take
wish they
Dan
could
Quinn
hire
as head
Dan Quinn.
coach.
It's an interesting consideration. It's probably a conversation that we'll have a little bit with Ben Baldwin on that season in review. Anything else we want to say on the Seahawks at this moment before that?
It was just ultimately kind of a bad season. Like, I mean, we can talk about that with Ben, but like, it wasn't that much fun along the way. There were a handful of moments and there were players that were fun, but also when you look back on it, I think there was a pretty complete misuse of Jackson Smith and Jigba. And figuring out
that far.
Okay, there was at least a minor or a medium misuse of Jackson Smith and Jigba. And you kind of can't help but look at the team and think about the money that's being paid at different positions and the resources that are being spent on different positions. And it's like, I love Zach Charbonnet, but they weren't one Zach Charbonnet away from being a good team. And having used the second round pick there on defense, that's where they needed a player, not for 2 years in a row drafting a running back in the second round. You could have taken this team, removed Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and had a 7th round draft pick or an undrafted free agent at running back. And I think they have the exact same record, or they most likely have a better record because you would have spent those draft picks somewhere else.
It's weird because we've talked about this. The Seahawks, Chris Carson was a huge success, and Thomas Rawls before him, but it's been so long since any of these, third string running backs that usually come in and have terrific success for teams have been able to do so for the Seahawks, which I think has convinced not only a lot of Seahawks fans, but the Seahawks as an organization that running backs matter, and has led to their investment in them, even though those investments haven't really paid off.
I like Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet as players. I like watching them and some of the plays that Ken Walker makes. I love Zach Charbonnet, but like realistically, I would love a defensive stop. I would love for the Seahawks to be able to stop Najee fucking Harris from running the ball. Like realistically, I'm not over that game 2 weeks ago against the Steelers. They missed the playoffs in that game. They missed the playoffs because of the missed field goal at LA, but like they just weren't a good enough team. That's it. That's what happened in the end. This isn't the same as the Huskies being like, oh, if there's one play or whatever, one play goes differently against Michigan. That's true. That's a reality. They were capably talent-wise on the same level playing field as Michigan. The Seahawks aren't playing the same fucking game as the Ravens are playing. They're nowhere near the Super Bowl. If they make the playoffs, they would have had to have been in a situation where they were playing against the Eagles to have won a game. So they just are so deeply far away that it's not one running back. It's not one 30-year-old defensive lineman. It's not another running back the next year. They have mishandled their resources pretty completely. They got set up on fucking third base so many times. They were born on third base with Russell Wilson, and they were born on third base with the Russell Wilson trade after that.
Yeah,
Russell Wilson
you were
has
saying
blessed this organization.
Look, the Jamal Adams trade obviously continues to work out very poorly for the Seahawks. But I think if you ask Denver Broncos fans, they have a candidate for a worse trade than the Jamal Adams trade.
I mean, they're basically.
No,
I feel like they're
No.
probably equal. I don't know. Russell Wilson played. He was
played.
there to play. The fact that the Seahawks have played Jamal Adams has been a net negative for them.
I agree
And they
with
gave
that.
up almost better draft picks on the whole, right? Now, I guess we
No,
got pretty damn good draft
Devin
picks for us.
Witherspoon, remember, is because of the Russell Wilson trade, friend.
I'm aware. But that's what I'm saying to you is they were born on third base twice, 2 different times. And they managed to turn it into literally after the draft. They had the defensive talent in place. They had Russell Wilson. They went out. They made the Cliff Averill and the Michael Bennett signings. And then they stopped doing good things until they traded. I mean, they're good draft picks, a handful along the way. But like organizationally and structurally, they kind of haven't done anything right except for that period and the trade of Russell Wilson. There's almost nothing else you can point to that it's like, hey, they made a good decision here. We fucking applauded when they drafted an offensive lineman because it was like they just didn't do something crazy in the first round. That's the threshold that we were at after the Russell Wilson trade. But there's nothing that you could say that they have done as far as allocation of resources. You get one salary cap, and they chose to spend a lot of that salary cap on Will Dissly. And obviously, Will Dissly is a dog for life, but like
Huge
on the
CD on
field,
Sunday.
on the field, Will Dissly is not having that kind of impact. The trade for Jamal Adams, all of the big trades that they've made, the trade for Leonard Williams, the trade for Sheldon Richardson, all of these things, process-wise, they are so bad at running a football team. They are truly awful at it. And that's what I'm saying is they've been born on third base. This isn't people who worked for it. They got lucky. If we are being honest, they got lucky with both of those trades.
I think you're overstating. I mean,
No, you do not get credit for a third round draft pick and being like, we found them.
They also drafted Richard Sherman in the 5th round. Cam Chancellor.
No, they had good young defensive talent for a couple of seasons. They did very good in those 2 situations. But if you don't have Russell Wilson, they're the New York Jets. Like that is if we're being honest with ourselves. Russell Wilson, I've gone through the whole cycle. I'm back at flatlining. This is it. This is where I'm going to be on Russell Wilson forever. He's the most important Seahawk in history. He is the best Seahawk in history, and he delivered us this timeline or whatever. Now, you could say that maybe they don't win the Super Bowl without that defense, but like they lucked into Russell Wilson. They lucked into the Russell Wilson trade, and they fucking blown it both times. So thank you for Devin Witherspoon.
I had one more point on the youth thing. You know who the youngest offense in the league was? And it's like not even close.
The Texans? Is it the Texans?
No, the Texans are quite good as well. You got to think a little closer to not.
It's the Rams?
It's not the Rams either. The Rams were very young on defense, not on offense. It's the Green Bay Packers, the team who knocked them out of the playoffs. Who, you know what they did as a young team? They got better as the season went along, which is what typically happens with young teams. Houston's an example of that as well, aside from the C.J. Stroud injuries.
I mean, the
Seahawks got worse over the course of the season.
Offensive-minded coach whose offense was good.
Weird.
That's how this is supposed to happen. But if you're a defensive-minded coach and you can't coach defense, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what Pete Carroll does, aside from being and I really like Pete Carroll. That's the thing. Pete Carroll will probably go down as the best coach in Seahawks history. I love Pete Carroll.
I don't think he'll probably go down as the best coach in Seahawks history.
I mean, there can always be a better coach.
But at this point,
Pete Carroll is the best coach in Seahawks history. And I love Pete Carroll. But also, Pete Carroll is so bad, and John Schneider are so bad at running a football team. And that is kind of their job.
Making trades.
But there's more than just making trades. What do they do that's good? Do they develop players?
They have traded down a lot historically. I mean, I don't think we need to have this entire fight right now. But you're cherry picking
like the minors things.
Trading down is the single most important thing you can do as a franchise.
The most important thing you can do as a franchise is value draft picks.
but trading down is part of valuing draft picks. And yes, I agree that they have frittered a number of them away on veteran players, not understanding the marginal
But
value
also
of rookie
not
salaries
drafting
as
players,
compared to veteran salaries.
not drafting players at optimal positions as well.
That is also something that they have not done well.
So I don't think that is valuing draft picks. The things you can do as coaches.
But again, you're just
develop
cherry
players.
picking the negative things and ignoring the positive things, which is what people do.
What are the positive things aside from, you want Ben here to have this? We're never going to be as angry when Ben's here. It's so neutral.
They have made a number of good trades involving late
Russell
round
Wilson.
picks for veterans. The Quandre Diggs trade is an amazing heist. Like,
But
again,
then,
you can't just
it's
ignore all the
not an
good
amazing
things
heist.
and say
I do not agree that the Quandre Diggs trade is an amazing heist. But then they also turned around and paid him like he was one of the best safeties in the league. What do you like? They fucked
Quandre
that
Diggs
one up
is
too.
one of the best safeties in the league.
Is he? What is his
Yes.
PFF grade?
I don't know what his PFF grade is. I'm not sure I particularly care. You just can't ignore all the good things they do and talk about only the negative things. If you any franchise, you can look at just the negative things. And you're repeating yourself.
5.1.
And this argument is tiresome and annoying. So
Okay.
we're moving on. Because
whatever.
In the wheel of Seattle sports management, with the Seahawks now, drawing all the ire, it has somehow gone away from the Seattle Mariners, who, speaking of vibes, had a very good vibes trade last week as they essentially completed their 2024 roster with a pair of trades. The first one to be reported, sending Robbie Ray to the Giants in exchange for coming home Mitch Haniger, along with another Italian, Anthony DiSclafani, starting pitcher. Then they sent Jose Caballero to the Tampa Bay Rays for first baseman outfielder Luke Raley. I mean, Haniger was the guy we wanted them to re-sign last year.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I do feel like there had to be a little part of it of just like, they obviously know Mitch. They knew that the fans were going to like this one.
Oh, yeah.
Having Mitch Haniger back on the roster the last time they made the playoffs, the first time they made the playoffs in so many decades. Like, we just like Mitch Haniger because we've seen, the Giants hadn't seen the positives of Mitch Haniger, but we've seen those. We've seen him be a middle of the order hitter for the Mariners and one of the best hitters on the team for a handful of years. So having Mitch Haniger back, I mean, who knows if Mitch Haniger will ever be that player again. But he has, this is the last year of his deal, right? So it's not a huge commitment.
No, he has a player option for 2025.
Okay, so 2 years.
I don't know what year
but,
it is.
But it's also not huge money on his deal. And there's upside to Mitch Haniger. This isn't a situation where, like, there's no chance of him being a good hitter. I think they have, at the very least, improved the lineup slightly with Mitch Haniger, and they've improved the window for success for the team. And they've also just added another major league caliber outfielder, which is something that they deeply needed. Seems like the players like him. People will be excited about Mitch Haniger.
I mean, they added 2 major league caliber outfielders in this trade. We'll talk about Raley later, but you mentioned the Giants not having seen the positives. They got the worst season of his major league career. He slashed 209, 266, 365, which is why the Giants were so eager to get out of the remainder of his contract. It was a 631 OPS. He had never previously been below 700. Haniger missed 2.5 months with a right forearm fracture after being hit by a pitch in mid-June, and after returning at the end of August, hit just 159 in the final 21 games he played. So, I mean, the hope is he'll be healthy, which, has always been the question mark with Haniger, and will produce more like we saw in Seattle. But there is some risk here that he's just kind of, sub-replacement going forward.
Still like Mitch Haniger.
Exactly. And gives the Mariners, along with Garver, a pair of Mitches. Important stat here from the great Alex Meyer of Mariners PR. The 1989 Cubs were the only major league team with multiple Mitches, both Webster and Williams, aka the Wild Thing.
Wild Thing.
And a pretty good team, the 1989 Cubs back then. DiSclafani, starting pitcher depth after the Mariners traded Marco Gonzalez and obviously Ray in this deal. Missed most of 2022 due to ankle surgery and was shut down last July due to a flexor strain, although it sounds like he is expected to be ready for spring training. Posted a 4.88 ERA last season, but the 4.35 FIP was more in line with his career 4.16 mark. So, a little better than the raw numbers looked. He's still rated just about at replacement level. And Jerry Dipoto said they're basically slotting him in the Chris Flexen role to start this season as the sixth guy in the rotation.
Arm. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's the type of player you need to have.
So the trade added $9 million in salary this season.
with a young pitching staff as well.
Yeah. So the trade added $9 million in salary this season, although the Giants sent $6 million in cash to cover some of that difference. But long term gives the Mariners massively more payroll flexibility than they had with Robbie Ray on their books. They subtract at least $9.5 million in salary in 25, pending that Haniger player option, assuming he picks that up, and $25 million in 2026, which is the last year of Ray's deal. So, the hope is that makes it easier to extend some of your young starting pitchers, and continue to spend in Julio's prime years. That's got to be the flexibility that Jerry Dipoto has highlighted over and over again.
Oh, and also just getting off Robbie Ray's contract. I mean, even getting any capable major leaguers for Robbie Ray, like it was just not a good contract at this point. It wasn't a good contract. I mean, he signed for maybe lower than you would expect for a Cy Young winner, but Robbie Ray was not somebody that you're looking at on the roster and saying to yourself, that's going to be a capable major league starter. But we'll always have the great moment of Robbie Ray's career. I don't remember what it was yet. There must have been a good start in there.
I'm sure there were some good starts, but yeah, I mean, he didn't play up to this contract in 2022 before the injuries and even before the Yordan Alvarez home run that will be the
Cy Young winner. Like we were talking about the most random Mariners single all-star. Cy Young winner is like, there are just so many guys who've won Cy Youngs where you're like, him?
Yeah, it turns out that pitching is pretty unpredictable from
They should
award
the Cy Young for like 3-year spans for pitchers, like on a single season basis. Pitching is so random, way more so than batting. But this just the random Cy Young winners where you're like, oh, I guess that guy won a Cy Young apparently.
Did we say that Bill Swift won a Cy Young? He did not, sadly. He finished second in the voting.
Did you say Cy Young winner Bill Swift?
I believe I did. He led the NL in ERA in 1992. And then in 93 again finished second in the voting. I have to assume that Greg Maddux would have been the winner that year. Yeah, he won the Cy Young.
I have to assume that the Giants are expecting him to be the next Bill Swift, Robbie Ray. They remembered that swindling of the Mariners. But let's talk about Luke Raley, because to me, this was the one that was actually more exciting of the trades that happened.
Yeah, I mean, vibes-wise, Haniger very exciting. But yeah, Raley is an interesting story. He had just 127 career at-bats before becoming a regular last year in Tampa Bay at age 28. Turned 29 in September. Hit 19 home runs and 357 at-bats. His offensive profile is pretty similar to Mike Ford. Not a super high batting average. He's good. The Mariners have finally approved some strikeouts in the lineup, it turns out, in order to acquire Luke Raley. But the difference between him and Mike Ford is Mike Ford was like a DH. Like, you could stick him out there at first base, but it wasn't going to go great. Raley not only can play first base, which I think is interesting, potentially down the line, depending on how Ty France's season goes, but also played all three outfield spots in Tampa Bay. Like, the idea of this archetype of player being in center field is just so mind-boggling to me that I can't imagine it. He probably won't play there in Seattle, obviously, with Julio Rodriguez, but Jerry Dipoto said he'd be a corner outfielder against right-handed pitching. And I think if you're looking at what the lineup looks like today, he's in a platoon in left field with Dylan Moore.
I also think that selling Luke Raley short, though, on offensive WAR, I mean, his is better than, Mike Ford has quite a few negatives in there throughout his career, but last year Mike WAR was at 0.6, and that was his best season since 2019. Luke Raley offensive WAR last year was 2.6 wins. So Luke Raley is a much better offensive player than Mike Ford is right now. He has had a better season last year than Mike Ford has had his entire career. Cobby, like the versatility, it sucks to lose that, but I still felt Cobby definitely fell out of favor in this lineup by the end of the season. had some nice moments. But when you look at the overall package as a hitter and what Luke Raley is providing with the power, the ability for extra base hits, a little bit of flexibility, I honestly don't exactly understand why the Rays made this trade.
I mean, Jose Caballero did have a pretty good WAR in large part because of his defensive contributions. Outstanding base stealer was 26 of 29 stealing bases last year. And the Rays, I assume, part of it is, look, the Rays are a very well-run organization. I don't think they're doing this completely ignorantly. Number one, the likelihood that Luke Raley regresses to the mean somewhat given his
Sure.
career track record. And number two, just positional needs lining up here between two teams that love to trade with each other. So, I think the report was that Caballero is penciled in, is their starting shortstop while they await Wander Franco's legal status going forward and whether he's able to play it at some point.
He's also younger. Like, I don't know. Maybe I get it, but I think Luke Raley is just a better batter than Jose Caballero is right now. And do you know who this means good things for?
Oh, Sam Haggerty. This is huge for Sam Haggerty.
So, I mean, both you factor in, like, Cabby definitely, he Wally pipped Sam Haggerty, like having that situation happen last year. I think for at least me personally, it was like, yeah, I like you, Cabby, but like, be careful right now. And so I could never quite buy into the Jose Caballero. People were just like, oh, he's the new Sam Haggerty. And I was like, first of all, so you get another Italian, more time on the field, which is a huge factor. But I also think Sam Haggerty provides a different element than Cabby does.
Well, he has the ability to play the outfield a little bit more credibly. He's a switch hitter for what that's worth. So yeah, I mean, there are some reasons to favor him. You are looking at the potential scenario if Tom Canzone wins what's probably the last spot on the roster. It's probably between him and Taylor and Trammell and some other candidates at outfield. You could be looking at a solid 3 Italian roster for the Mariners to start the season.
Oh, I would assume that Canzone. So I mean, we're thinking of Haniger as the starting right fielder right now.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, they're gonna have to, just even given Haniger's injury history, they're gonna be penciling in that he's not playing 160 games.
Of course.
But I still am kind of thinking of that being Canzone's spot long term. So that you're saying right now the roster is right field Haniger.
Yep.
Center field Julio.
Yep.
Left field Canzone.
No,
Ty
left field,
France.
Luke Raley.
Or left field Luke Raley.
Yeah. And Dylan Moore in a platoon, presumably.
And then a platoon between Canzone and players like that as the fourth outfielder.
Yep.
First base, Ty France.
Yep.
Second base, Josh Rojas.
Probably a platoon with Haggerty.
Shortstop, J.P. Crawford.
Yep.
Third base, Luis Urias.
Correct.
Urias. And then Garver plus Cal Raleigh behind the plate / DH.
Yep. And then Sebi Zavala, presumably is your backup catcher, is the 13th guy on the roster.
It's kind of not a bad roster.
I mean, the upside here is I don't see a single Tommy La Stella.
It's hard to find the Tommy La Stellas until you're well into the season.
I think we could find the Tommy La Stella on opening day last year, but if you sit down at the table,
yeah, we could. It was actually Tommy La Stella.
If you sit down at the table and don't see the Tommy La Stella, that means you are the Tommy La Stella.
Hopefully, Sam Haggerty doesn't sit down at that table.
Oh, dear.
I still think there are a couple of positions that could use upgrades, and they still need more major league talent. The high end hitting is still pretty questionable to me. I mean, you're expecting a lot from Garver, Cal Raleigh to repeat. Obviously, Julio's going to have a monster year. J.P. Crawford wasn't that great of a hitter 2 seasons ago. And I do think just penciling J.P. Crawford in as your leadoff hitter or a very solid offensive player, maybe he and Ty France kind of balance each other out or something like that. Ty France is a little bit better. JP's a little bit worse. I think it is a capable roster to compete for a playoff spot.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a capable roster to compete with the Rangers and the Astros, but I think it's a capable roster in general to compete for the playoffs.
I mean, it's not like they finished that far behind those teams, and it's not like those teams have added a lot to their rosters this offseason. I think it's realistic for them to be in the mix with those teams.
It's kind of just incredible how low the threshold was for Jerry Dipoto. Like, really, these are not wild moves that Jerry Dipoto made. It's not like, they're all nice moves. But between the signing and the couple of trades, that's kind of all we were looking for. It didn't need to be a splash.
Yeah, I mean, just it's the tone started out so negative that nothing that they could have not done the rest of the offseason would have been as bad as what people were thinking at that point.
It's like almost kind of genius to just set the expectations so low that you could just do anything slightly. It was, again, when the Seahawks drafted Charles Cross, we fucking paraded in the streets, right? I think we threw a parade for them just drafting Charles Cross. That was it. Just making a normal pick. And I think that's what the Mariners did with this one. They just made some normal trades. Getting off Robbie Ray's contract long term also, I think opens up some flexibility. I mean, not I think. It definitely opens up some flexibility for the roster and some places that they're going to be able to spend.
I do also think the front office is on notice for adding payroll mid-season if they're in the mix, because they are going to end up coming in with a lower payroll, barring a pretty dramatic addition to the roster, even before you factor in the $6 million that they're getting from the Giants. They're sending some money to the Braves, but they're getting more than they're sending out. So,
plus there's also young superstar level talent on both offense and pitching. So I think that's kind of what you look for, is you want very, very good players with, between George Kirby, Castillo already is, but like George Kirby and Julio, there are players who it wouldn't be impossible for George Kirby to win the Cy Young next year. And
not at all.
It wouldn't be impossible for Julio to win the MVP next year. And if one of those players makes even a slight leap, I think the Mariners could be in conversation for one of the better records in the AL.
There you go.
That's it. That's all it took. It didn't take that much. And in addition from an AL West rival as well.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the roundup, starting with the red hot Seattle Kraken. The temperatures are cold. The Kraken are red hot. They concluded their homestand with a 4-1 win over Ottawa last Thursday, then started a 6-game East Coast road trip on Tuesday with a 5-2 win in Buffalo, extending their winning streak to 7 games, one short of the franchise record. They've now taken points in their last 11 games, dating back to December 12th, which will be nearly a full month by the time they next take the ice on Thursday at Washington.
All right, that's it. I'm going to start paying attention to the Kraken.
There you go. That's all it took. 7 consecutive wins.
I'm in. I mean, if we were in January, you know what I mean? We're getting closer to the playoffs. Maybe all it took was all the football ending the exact same day, basically.
That didn't hurt. All right, a little Sounders news.
Not having a basketball team, and also the college basketball season ending that same weekend somehow.
I wouldn't go that far. Sounder at Heart reported the Sounders have finalized the signing of Brazilian center back Nathan, who spent the last 3 seasons with the San Jose Earthquakes, missing all of 2023 due to an ACL tear suffered in February before becoming a free agent. Nathan, who was previously a starter in San Jose, adds depth at center back for the Sounders, who look increasingly likely to trade Javier Arriaga and get some salary flexibility that way.
When they announce the players, they do the last name, right? You have to say the last name. It's just going to be like Brazilian center back, and everybody's going to yell Nathan.
I mean, he does have a last name, Cardoso, so presumably they will chant that, but he does go mononymically, as so many of his Brazilian brethren do.
Oh, stick with the one name, Nathan. Don't even tell them your last name. You're not Rogers Nelson, you're Prince. Nathan.
All right, well, we have a rebranded section and the roundup, because although their rumored sale is not yet complete, it is official. The Reign are rebranding back to Seattle Reign FC after having spent 1 season as Reign FC following their move to Tacoma in 2019, and then becoming OL Reign after their purchase by OL Group, which is currently selling the team. They are returning to their classic logo with the classic dark blue color, as well as adding royal gold to the palette in place of the silver that was originally part of the logo in their uniforms. It's a good look. I'm so excited to have it back and to have Seattle back in the name of this team now that they are playing their games in Seattle, although they are headquartered, of course, for now in Tequila.
There we go. I'm not sure about this new logo.
It's basically the old logo. What are you not sure about it?
I okay. I'll accept it. I'm gonna have to give it time. I'm not sure about the color palette for a Seattle team. It feels a little bit like San Jose Earthquakes to me or something.
I don't get that note. I mean, blue is kind of the consistent link. A lot of the teams have green here. You have to generally, other than the Huskies, you have to have either green or blue. But I like having the gold in there to mix it up a little bit.
Okay.
But worse news for Seattle Reign FC on the field is last week completing a long rumored move. Their stars Rose Lavelle and Emily Sonnet both signed with reigning
Oh
MWSL
my
champions
gosh.
Gotham FC.
What is this? The WNBA again?
It does seem that way. We're in our super
Oh,
team era in women's pro sports. Continuing off season, had already seen Gotham, which beat the Reign in the final last year in San Diego, add fellow USWN team members Crystal Dunn and Tierna Davidson.
God, this begins the Clone Wars with the NWSL.
Both Lavelle and Sonnet were unrestricted free agents. Lavelle played 2+ seasons for the Reign, resulting in the 2022 NWSL Shield and last year's trip to the final, but started just 4 league matches last season between injuries and playing in the World Cup. Sonnet, who was acquired before the season in exchange for this year's Reign first-round pick, was a bigger part of their run, starting all 19 league games she played, plus all 3 playoff matches. So certainly can be difficult to replace, and we have not seen Oil Reign make any significant additions to the roster yet in this offseason.
All right, we're getting the take machine going. No. Seattle Reign, do something.
It's also very funny because, of course, the team they're signing with is owned by Super in part. So you may ask, how can Gotham FC do this? Well, with the new TV deal that's kicking in that we talked about, dramatically, you know, exponentially increasing the NWSL's TV revenue, the salary cap rose to 2.75 million from last season. It was 1.375 million, so half that in terms of the base. Plus, you were allowed 600K allocation money last season. There is still some allocation money being used, but not nearly as much of it anymore. With that dramatic increase in the cap, which is only going to keep going up from here, which is great to see. But don't love to see it concentrating all the talent on another New York women's pro sports team.
And where does Gotham FC play?
I believe they play in Harrisonburg, New Jersey, along with the Red Bulls. All right, let's get into UW basketball. First, the women went 0-2 in the Bay Area. Disappointing loss Friday at Cal. They shot just 35.5% from the field. El Ladine had 24 points on 9 of 18 shooting, but nobody else scored more than 10 as Delia Daniels, who went 1 of 11 against her former team, and Chloe Briggs, who went 2 of 10, particularly struggled. Huskies played much better Sunday at number 8 Stanford, still lost that one 71-59. Did have 4 players in double figures, led by 15 from Daniels, who bounced back. But Cameron Brink had 16 points and 16 boards in 25 minutes. Frontcourt mate Kiki Irafan had 19 points and 9 boards in 23 minutes. The Cardinal had nearly as many offensive rebounds with 18 as UW had defensive rebounds, 19. Kudos to Tara Vanderveer. Sunday was her 1,200th career win, moving her, I believe it's 2 away from Mike Krzyzewski's Division I record for men's or women's basketball coaches. Huskies back home on Sunday for their first Pac-12 home game against Washington State, looking for a sweep of the Apple Cup Series. Cougs have started this conference play 0-3. They also were swept in the Bay Area, so badly in need of a win after what was a very solid non-conference season. You'll recall when these teams met back in December in Pullman, Washington State was ranked at the time.
Wild.
UW men's basketball, another heartbreaker Thursday against Oregon. The Huskies led by 2 with 3:31 left in their Pac-12 home opener, and then tied the game at 67, 72, and 74, the latter with 39 seconds left on a pair of Keon Brooks free throws before Jermaine Couisnard gave Oregon the lead with 12 seconds left, and Paul Mulcahy missed a go-ahead 3 attempt on the Huskies' final possession. But it probably should not have been that close. UW shot 12 of 22 on free throws in this one, including a shocking 5 of 12 for Brooks, who's normally been an outstanding free throw shooter.
I was at basketball practice, so I saw none of this game, but like I just being alerted to it was really devastating. Not only to lose to Oregon, but to lose in that fashion at a time of year. Like this is the kind of loss that's going to keep them out of the NCAA tournament. And you talk about the dial. We talk about the what is the Pete Carroll? Do we have a dial or
Well, that's the
is that a
Pete
roller
coaster.
coaster with Pete? That's the Pete coaster. Okay, what do we have for Mike Hopkins? The will he get an extension dial? Because it definitely turned a different direction this last weekend.
I mean, it was along the same lines of what we talked about last week, where just kind of you you know none of these losses individually as they started 0-3 in conference play were bad, but you had to win at least one of them to, kind of still feel good about your chances. And Oregon is maybe the toughest of these three to lose because that is a team you legitimately, you were talking about the importance of getting a signature win, but Oregon is a team you legitimately could be competing against on the bubble. I guess Colorado now is showing up as on the bubble in their own right. The Huskies no longer among even the top 8 teams out. So
I
they
mean,
have
why would they
slipped
be? They're 1 and
significantly.
3 in Pac-12 play. What about their profile? Sometimes you just have to win games.
I agree.
That's kind of it. They're in the part of the season where winning games is important, and they're not doing very good at that. So that's why this loss was brutal to Oregon. They needed a sweep in these two because they already had lost the previous two. They needed one of those before they needed one of these, though. And as more weeks pass, like all of a sudden, it's putting a lot of pressure on some games that are going to be a lot harder to win. And they basically need to beat every single team that they should beat from this point forward, and also pick off some wins against some teams that they shouldn't beat.
I mean, I think you're still a little dire because they're gonna be favored in, like, Ken Palm has them favored in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wait, how many of these? Yeah, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of their remaining 16 games they're favored in. So if they win just the games they're supposed to win, they're in great shape.
You think they're in if they win all 12 of those games?
Yeah, I mean, at that point they'd have 21 wins
Okay.
in a power conference with some pretty
I mean,
good non-conference wins.
that's kind of what I'm saying. Okay, so you're saying it's just the base of they need to win every single game
I
because
don't
they're
think
still at that point with
I
those
don't think
12.
they
I mean, that
need
puts
to
them.
win every single game. There's still a lot of time left in the
How many
season.
conference wins do they need to get to right now? If you just had to pick a number.
I mean, I think they need to be at 11 to have a legitimate shot going into the Pac-12 tournament.
So they need to win 10 more games.
Yeah. And I mean, their Ken Palm projection is 10-10. So that's not far off. 12-8, I think you'd feel good about their chances. 11-9, though, it's like, well, maybe if they get to the final
So
and
they're
lose
favored
there,
in those
they could
games,
be
but the
okay.
Ken Palm projection is still lower because the
Because they're
assumption is
not
that you're going to lose a game you're
100% on
favored in.
any of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, their
I'm
their
honestly
highest
surprised
win
they're
probability in
projected to
any
win
game
that
is
many games
84%. I mean, they're still
against.
not playing poorly. Their 3 losses they started 0-3 in conference play came by a combined 11 points. Like, again,
It
yes, you
just
need to win
requires
those games, but
other people noticing these things, though. Right now, they are at the whim of a committee noticing that these things are happening. And the way that you get them to notice the things are happening is by winning games, not by playing close. Playing close ultimately is nice and it's good for Ken Palm and it's good for the stats, but people in the end generally are going to look at the wins.
I agree. But the point is, playing close against good teams generally translates to more likely beating bad teams. Now, the Huskies weren't very impressive in the fashion in which they did finally get on the board with the Pac-12 win on Saturday against Oregon State, but they did get it. That one, they had to sweat it out after leading by as many as 12 in the second half. Beavers got within 4 in the final minute, but the Huskies hung on for the 79-72 win. Brooks scoring 26 points in that one. Oregon State in it largely because Jordan Pope had 29 points on 10 of 17 shooting, including 5
Wow. I
three-pointers.
saw none of that either, but that sounds like some Oregon State shit.
I don't know what Jordan Pope's stat line looks like over the course of this season. They said he patterned his game after Steph Curry and Trae Young, and there was a lot of step back threes in this one. He's at 37% from three over the course of the season. So it was actually the 7 of 10 or the 5 of 7 inside the arc that was more out of line with his season performance.
I feel like pattern your game after Steph Curry and Trae Young usually leads to like one of the worst basketball players you've ever seen.
He's very good. He's not the reason that Oregon State is bad. I'll put it that way.
Uh, I, you know what? We haven't really talked about this. We've only talked about football primarily with the conference realigning, but like I actually in basketball, I like the idea of playing whenever more than the Thursday Saturday schedule. Obviously, getting away from Pac-12 basketball refs is going to be an all-time great move, but like it'll be interesting to play these Big Ten teams because we just haven't done it that much. But like the history that we have with Oregon State, honestly, it's kind of the same as the history that we have with Oregon State of just like constantly frustrating games and players where you're like, there's no way that guy can hit that shot or whatever. And it's just been generationally. But I do think in basketball, the just you play the team so many times because you play them each a couple of times a year. Like we have actually more history with these teams in basketball than we do in football. And maybe even, like longer term because of that. So that actually will be a frustrating piece or a sad piece of moving conferences is that we just don't really have, I don't feel like we have a rivalry with UCLA or USC or even really like Oregon to that great of an extent in basketball.
I think there used to be much more of one in like in the Bender era. I feel like UCLA was a more legitimate rival, at least at the high points of that one. And then when Romar was the coach, like beating UCLA meant more back then.
Oregon with Aaron Brooks, I think Ryan Appleby and Aaron Brooks got into it, right?
Whoa, yeah.
Which, by the way, I mean we're talking about a Mina Kimes level trader, Aaron Brooks, but
oh no, we ended up siding with Aaron Brooks on that one. Let's be clear.
Why?
Because Ryan Appleby like shook off his apology.
In the fight, but we could side with Aaron Brooks in the fight, but choosing to go to Oregon from UW when Lorenzo Romar is the head coach at UW is a questionable decision.
He was. I forget when Aaron Brooks.
Maybe they must have recruited him.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they would have recruited Aaron Brooks.
I don't know. Mina Kimes isn't actually a trader. She still cheers for UW.
Aaron Brooks' first year there was Romar's first year at UW. So he actually probably had already committed to Oregon before Romar was hired. All right, so this weekend,
mild pass for not committing to Bob Bender.
Obviously, Mina and many people, including our Yale alumni who got shouted out on the postgame pod last night, which, by the way, we haven't mentioned it. You should listen to that if you haven't already, I suppose. They should definitely cheer for UW, even if they didn't go there.
I feel like that was the most muted podcast that we've had. Maybe like there was one time we did a State of the Arena podcast, which was just like a straight like interview podcast.
I don't know about that.
It was pretty neutral though, right?
It was calm.
I've worked myself up about the refs more today. We can talk about the Huskies in a second.
Wilhelm Breidenbach has now scored double figures in 3 consecutive games, played the vast majority of the second half. I don't think Mia was in foul trouble. I was just rewatching this one on Synergy, so I didn't have like the full context of the broadcast, but like Breidenbach's good, man. I don't know what to tell you. Huskies overall dropped 7 spots in KenPom this weekend, just to note that.
Any word on Frank Kepnong?
Percy Allen reported that he worked out before the game, so we'll see. Probably he's going to play again at some point.
Huge difference not having Frank Kepnong.
Without question. Yeah. No, Braxton Mia only had 3 fouls, so he easily could have come back. He played 9 minutes on Saturday. Breidenbach played 28. So pretty wild how important Breidenbach has become as one of the original Breidenbachers. So this is a key weekend for the Huskies where they need to come away with 2 wins, I think. And that's a funny thing to say about these 2 teams. Both of them, I believe, made the NCAA tournament last year. And it's the mixed home road weekend that used to be played in December, but was moved this year because of the calendar. I think there's 1 extra weekend, basically, because of the fact that they played the first weekend of conference play at the end of December. Huskies play Thursday against Arizona State at home, then travel on Sunday to play at UCLA. Huskies kind of lucked out on both of these, obviously, by missing Arizona at home, although that's usually a fun game. And then USC is the road, will not play them on the road. Sun Devils went 6-5 in non-conference, including a bad loss at number 223 San Diego, but have started 4-0 in the Pac-12. They swept at the Bay Area schools, then beat both Utah and Colorado at home, knocking Colorado onto the bubble. Still only ranked 101st in KenPom. Their defense has been outstanding. They're number 131 in adjusted defensive efficiency, but they're outside the top 200 in adjusted offensive efficiency, shooting 49% on twos, 31% on threes, and unbelievably 63% on free throws as a team. Opponents have predictably shot the lowest three-point percentage against them in conference play that goes into that 4-0 start, but they're also benefiting from the eligibility of transfer Adam Miller, who started his career as an NBA prospect at Illinois before playing a year at LSU. He was one of the two-time transfers that became automatically eligible after Raekwon Battle's suit against the NCAA resulted in the NCAA ruling all of those players available to play. He's played the last 6 games, is averaging 13.3 points per game, and has gone 10 of 26 from 3 in Pac-12 play. Arizona State led by junior guard Frankie Collins, who's a volume scorer, but top 10 in the country in steal rate. UCLA, after making their 3rd consecutive trip to the Sweet 16 last year, started the year number 26 in KenPom, pretty high expectations. But after a 3-0 start against dreadful competition, have won just 2 of their last 10 games, including a home loss to Cal State Northridge and a sweep at home against the lowly Bay Area schools.
Man, I could just feel this loss coming.
I know. Their lone Pac-12 win is by the same 69-62 final as the Huskies had against Oregon State, albeit on the road for UCLA. They have dropped to 107 in KenPom with a similar profile to Arizona State. They're 36th in adjusted defensive efficiency, but number 218 on offense with an effective field goal percentage ranked 332nd in the country. They're shooting 45% on twos and 29% on threes, taking a lot fewer of those than Arizona State. Still have to be wary of sophomore center Adem Bona, who's shooting 60% on twos, 24th in the nation in block rate. But sophomore Will McClendon is the only UCLA player hitting better than 30% of his threes on at least 15 attempts.
What happened to UCLA? I mean, aside from losing NBA level talent, but like you would assume that a UCLA program, especially one that had made the NCAA tournament or the Sweet 16 3 years in a row, would be able to replenish that talent pretty quickly.
It's kind of baffling. Like I said, the expectations were reasonably high for this team. Sebastian Mack was a pretty well-regarded recruit. He's basically become their go-to player on offense, and his efficiency has struggled under that weight, 41% on twos, 28% on threes. And then for some reason, they have decided to heavily recruit international players in the front court. Adem Bona is one of those and has worked out quite well. The other guys they have are considered NBA prospects, but haven't really contributed yet this season. And again, they just kind of they forgot to recruit shooting. It's like very rare that you look at UW against a team and they're like, oh yeah, they've got a huge shooting edge in this one.
They forgot to recruit shooting. I mean, they obviously, the reason that they went international, right? They're trying to do the Gonzaga thing. Is that what's going on?
I mean, I guess so. And, Arizona has obviously done that very successfully, but Arizona, which is hitting 38.5% from 3-point range, did not forget shooting.
It's like, I trying to think of a good example of this. It's like Billy Joel is now a punk artist or something. Like sometimes it just doesn't suit you. Maybe just recruit the best players from the United States, UCLA, or maybe USC kind of became the cool school to go to because that's obviously like recruiting wise the more in demand school in LA. But I have a question for you unrelated to both of these because I was kind of unaware. He wasn't on your players to watch list or anything, but a player who I really liked in college, Jaime Jaquez, right?
Yeah.
He's on the Heat now.
A little too prominent to be on the players to watch list. Yeah, Jaime Jaquez.
I had no idea what team he was on, so I learned that recently. And is he hooping on the Heat?
Well, you weren't aware of this because he was a key point of negotiation in the hypothetical Heat Blazers Damian Lillard trade negotiations, which apparently never actually happened because the two teams didn't actually talk. Blazers fans spent the entire offseason diminishing Jaquez's trade value, and like, boy, he's pretty awesome right now. Like, especially with what's happened with Robert Williams' unfortunate injury, like that Miami package is looking way better than what they got right now. Obviously, the draft picks are still coming down the road and they're going to be great for them, but it's an interesting outcome. Uh, Hawkins was not a very good 3-point shooter at UCLA. He did really everything else well, I would say. And, older players do tend to be pretty risky as NBA first round picks. The Blazers are perhaps seeing this with Chris Murray, who has yet to really contribute at all as a 4-year college guy. But Hawkins, I guess his 3-point shooting has fallen off in recent weeks. He's down to 35%. But I think I saw that he's played more minutes per game in the fourth quarter than anyone else in the NBA.
Anybody in the league?
Like he's finishing every game for them as a reserve. This is pretty wild. He's just been awesome.
Ugh. What pick was he?
He was the 18th pick.
Okay. Where did the Lakers draft? Did they have a pick?
The Lakers drafted 17th. They took Jalen Hood-Schifino.
Is he doing anything?
No, I mean, he's also a one and done guy, so it's not quite apples to oranges, but I mean, in fairness,
how the Lakers let this happen, as a sort of kind of Lakers fan, I guess, like how the Lakers let this happen with Jaime Jaquez in their backyard, getting drafted a pick later to the Heat of all teams.
But it's the next 3 picks, because the pick right after Jaquez was on our players to watch, Brandon Pajemski.
Oh,
who's already starting times for the Warriors, and then Cam Whitmore, who was considered like a likely top 5 pick, but dropped to the 20th pick where Houston got him. He hasn't played a lot this season, but he's been hooping lately. So it looks like the next 3 picks after the Lakers could all be really, really quality players.
Is Rob Pelinka still running their front office?
Yes.
Retire, bitch.
I mean, the Lakers have actually.
What do they do well?
The Lakers have actually drafted quite well, especially, kind of the later picks, and then getting Austin Reeves as an undrafted free agent. But Hood-Schifino was one of my least favorite prospects relative to where he was considered by experts. He's like huge, but specializes in pull-up too. It's like, if everything goes right for him, he's DeMar DeRozan.
Should we know your feelings?
Just not my favorite player archetype.
Your feelings have been very clear on that one.
I mean,
Chicago Bulls fans definitely knew your feelings too.
I mean, obviously, that would be an amazing outcome if they got a DeMar DeRozan level player at the 17th pick. But
it's one of those things though where you see like the star linebacker end up with the Steelers or whatever, or you're just like,
Patrick
we
Queen.
all let this happen. Yeah, like one of those players ending up on one of those teams. No, I mean, all the shit that I've talked about Jalen Carter, but like Jalen Carter ending up on the Eagles is just like, you're looking around the room and you're like, we all did this. We all let this happen. And I feel like Jaquez ending up on the Heat is just like this is what we're doing here at NBA. Anyway, that was an aside that I wanted to ask you about.
We'll be back with Jaime Jaquez's spot in my rookie rankings on Monday, along with Bobby Marks on ESPN Plus.
Ooh. Can you give us a tease for where he ranks?
I have not started it, but Heat fans were like I think he might have been 5th last time, and Heat fans were furious at how low I had him. And 2 of the guys ahead of him, to be clear, are Victor Wembanyama and Jed Holmgren.
Bro, the mind of an NBA fan is so warped. I feel like more so than any sport, right?
I don't know. It is probably
seeking of people hating on your own players is like out of control in the NBA. It's because they don't actually people do watch the games, but nobody cares about the games. There's a difference. You watch the games, but you don't care about them. And so that makes the people complaining online way more interesting.
Also, the NBA fans are by far the most online of any sport.
Oh yes. Oh my God, they are online.
All right, that brings
us. I hope
us
it's me someday.
to UW football. Do you have further thoughts on the title game?
Nope.
Oh, it's the return of our old friend Awkward Silence.
That was disgruntled silence. Thank you. Uh, I I still just think it was a really frustrating game, and I think UW had. I think they actually went into this with the right game plan, and
You don't think they ran too much early?
maybe a little, but I don't know. People just grabbing those clips of like, I I think that
How open Jalen McMillan would have been on that screen pass?
oh, there's a lot of those plays though, like things that we did well throughout the season that we just didn't do in this one game. And like it kind of in this very moment, it reminds you of all the times that the team wasn't very good throughout the year. And that's why if I had to have any concern, like if the Seahawks were talking about drafting Michael Penix, I'd be like, there were some moments where I was like, I don't think Michael Penix is very good. Um, and I think that that kind of they looked more like that team than they did the team that played against Oregon or against Texas. And I think because it had happened consecutive times, how good they looked in those games back to back, we sort of expected that the weather was a part of it or Michael Penix's injury, but like they kind of just were really, really close a lot, but never quite had the play. And it ended up being frustrating. Uh,
I mean,
I
I
don't
think the
know.
one thing Michigan
It,
fans will probably point out is that their win probability never got below 79% in the second half of this game. So even though it felt like the Huskies were close, like Michigan was in control still the entire way. Now, it probably would have gotten lower than that had that Roma Dunze pass stood.
yes. I mean, that's the one that like they finally broke through, and to have that called back is, it just completely changed the entire game, obviously. But like, I wish that we could have that one back. There was a story about Kalen DeBoer losing in his first year at North Dakota, right? And then retooling after that and getting bigger on the lines as like that's what needs to be done. And my feelings about college football. I mean, this might be my feelings about the NFL as well, but
Well, you've been poo-pooing drafting a left tackle the entire time here, so apparently they're not.
have I?
Yeah.
No, I'm not poo-pooing drafting a left tackle. I'm just saying that the margin for what we're celebrating is very low. It was the right draft pick. I'm happy that they have that left tackle. He's had a great season. And I think that left tackle on the Seahawks is who's going to help them unlock the offense long term. But like, I don't want you to misconstrue that as poo-pooing, I guess
Okay.
is what I'm saying. Because that's not what it is. Drafting a left tackle is the most important thing you can do. But I do think, to me, I've
Drafting a
always said this.
quarterback is the most important thing you can do.
Well, yeah, sure. Uh, the biggest difference to me and to everybody, I think, between the really, really, really good programs and programs like UW is talent on the lines and size on the lines. And UW this year was funny that to see people talk about just how much Michigan's D line abused the Washington offensive line, because this was the number one group in the country. And they did win the award offensive line wise. I don't think that they were actually quite at that level.
No, they clearly were. Like they won this award in large part because of the fact that Michael Penix Jr. is extremely good at escaping pressure. Like we've seen a number of stats. I believe it was College Football Insight that, and it was in Danny Kelly's piece on the Ringer on Monday about Penix's draft stock, that he's like off the charts in terms of pressure to sack ratio in terms of how low it is. So I think Penix sacks are a quarterback stat, but people voting for offensive line awards are considering it an offensive line stat.
So, I mean, if there is a way, I also at the same time think that pretty much every coach around the country gets this. Kalen DeBoer didn't just discover that offensive lines are important. So it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. It's a lot easier to find skill position talent. And even when you see the players in the transfer portal, there are a lot of running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks in the transfer portal. The Huskies can end up with a quarterback. I think they can find a pretty good quarterback almost anywhere. And I think a pretty good quarterback in the right situation. Michael Penix might be a pretty good quarterback in the right situation if we were being completely honest with ourselves. But like, if they are able to improve the line significantly as they go to the Big Ten, that's going to be the difference between UW having one nice year and UW being a perennial power. So, but also I think there are some people who are a little bit too negative about them. And like we talked about, they binned all these New Year's Six bowls. They went as an at-large team a lot of these times, or at least one of the times, right? To all these New Year's Six bowls. It's not like they were lucking their way in. The conference was maybe slightly down, but like this is a culmination of a generation for UW. And I don't think that if Michigan had this exact same timeline that they had up to this point, people would be like, that's a great generation Michigan had. That is just the beginning and they're going to keep going. I think because it's UW, people assume this is it. But to me, they're probably going to be worse next year because
Michigan
a lot of very good talent is leaving.
Michigan doesn't have a stretch where they went like 7 years without going to a bowl game in the past 20 years.
Michigan, look, their history is obviously overall is amazing, but like there still were some Brady Hoke years. There was quite a while in between.
I think there are levels to this. I mean, I agree that those were down seasons and frustrating years. They made the bowl game every year but one. Brady Hoke was there. They missed bowl games back to back in Rich Rodriguez's first 2 seasons after replacing Lloyd Carr. That's the only time they have missed bowl games in consecutive years since the 1970s, back when it was Rose Bowl or bust.
I'm not saying that UW is at the same level as Michigan is. Michigan's one of these best programs in the country, but like there have been some down seasons. It took still Jim Harbaugh is probably, maybe aside from Nick Saban, the best coach in all of college football. Jim Harbaugh is so overly qualified for that job. He went to a fucking Super Bowl, right? Like he didn't leave the Niners in shame. He wasn't fired from the Niners. Like
he also did a pretty awesome job at Stanford. It should be noted.
Jim Harbaugh, as little as I want to give him credit, Jim Harbaugh's up there with the best college football coaches of all time. So like this is a Jim Harbaugh national championship more than it is a Michigan national championship. He happens to be the coach at Michigan, but like Jim Harbaugh did this. They should be thanking their lucky stars for him and doing everything that they can to try to maintain him as head coach.
So, I mean, I think that's fair. I think the other thing that's probably worth noting is, Michigan before Jim Harbaugh, like you're comparing, and I think this will generally work to UW's favor, but maybe not relative to the Michigans and Ohio States and Penn States of the world, was in a world where there was a less direct correlation between your resources as an institution and your roster, because you had to do it a little more indirectly by figuring out who was going to be the best player among
the tickets for the games and how to get them onto the sideline.
Yes, fair point. But what I'm saying is, in the transfer portal era, I do think there is probably likely to be a bit more concentration of talent at these historical powers.
No, I mean, and that's what UW, I think UW already has gotten pretty significant talent through the transfer portal. Having the season is an important season transfer portal wise. And when you look at the players that are coming in, they've got, I think it's 7 players, all of whom are probably going to be starters next year or on the field.
I don't know if they're all going to be starters, but yeah.
Should
we talk about a couple of these transfers that we have not talked about previously?
Wait, so no, I just want to finish that thought though, which is on the lines, which is something that Kalen DeBoer is going to focus on. UW has a handful of things going for them. If they're competing generally, Oregon is obviously a tough competition. They're competing at a national level for a lot of players, especially transfer players. But as a byproduct of being in the Big Ten and being one of 2 teams in the Big Ten in the Northwest, UW has now elevated themselves past quite a few programs. And recruits are going to notice this. The national exposure, when you talk about looking at the ratings for that game, it was true across all college football games this last year. College football is more important right now than it was 5 years ago. But you're categorically wrong about college football. But being the only team in the Northwest, or alongside Oregon, being one of 2 teams in the Northwest in the Big Ten, when they're competing with Stanford for players, the next Foster Sarrell is going to UW. And those players, the education and stuff like that matters. TV exposure, being in a place where there's a relative level of certainty is going to matter. I don't think they're going to be able to compete with Alabama, Georgia, Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State for offensive linemen. Do I think that they could compete with USC? Probably. And do I think that they could compete with just that second tier down? Could they go into the Midwest and can they pluck some players away from some of those territories? The Hogs in Wisconsin and in Minnesota and in Iowa and places like that. If all of a sudden it's like, hey, you don't have to be where it's freezing cold all the time. You can still play Big Ten football, get in front of your friends and your family, and you could be in Seattle fucking Washington with this offense on the other side. Like, I think that UW has a chance to build something. I don't think they're going to be one of the 5 or 6 best programs in the country, but I think they could be at a point where they make the playoffs every 3 years or so. And in the same place, like I think they could be at the place that Penn State is at, where they're a consistently pretty good team if they can maintain the coach and if they can avoid any sort of severe embarrassment or something like that. Like, we have to see what this transition is going to look like. I think it'll be a relatively seamless transition to the Big Ten, but given all those things and knowing that Kalen DeBoer wants to think about the lines, like they should be spending so much of their energy and time and resources building the lines and trying to dominate there. And it's what they have to do in the Big Ten. And that's how, when they go into these competitions, if they make the playoff and they're playing against teams from the SEC, from the Big 12, possibly from the ACC, if they let any of them in, like they have to be able to out physical those teams. So I hope that is something that Kalen DeBoer is able to do. And the offensive line is great this year. Like, we're talking about them playing against fucking Michigan.
Yeah.
Michigan.
They handled their business against Texas, which was also.
That's what I'm saying. I think they did a great job so far. And I think Kalen DeBoer, he should look at this and always be trying to get better, because you can. But like, they did pretty fucking good. They out physicaled Oregon. Dylan Johnson ran for 150 yards against Oregon. And there's a lot of money going to those recruits. And there's a lot of stars in those recruits. So I think what they did was very, very impressive. And there is another level to get to. And I think that's what Michigan taught us. So I hope that that's what's able to happen for this program.
I did want to say kind of quickly on this topic. One thing we didn't mention in the post-game pod is we've talked a bit about the idea of Pac-12 teams bringing more of that offensive style to the Big Ten next season and beyond. Monday night's game was very much a Big Ten game. Michigan was able to impose their will stylistically by taking away the big play from the Huskies and with the pressure that they were able to put on Michael Penix Jr. in that one. And so that was interesting in kind of the first salvo between these two teams.
I agree that that's the case. I think it's going to be not an instant thing. I think it's going to be a slow chip away. And all of a sudden, when there's a really, really, really good USC team, and Michigan and Ohio State are like, oh shit, they are playing at a different level than us. Like, I agree that they were able to impose their will physically on UW, and it was a Big Ten type of game. I still think that's going to change, though. What that means, like, it never happens instantly. And I guess that's the other thought that I had was like, people think that these runs or dynasties last forever, and maybe this is a bad thing for UW, but like seeing how down Clemson is, when there was a time when Clemson looked like they were the only competitor with Alabama as at an extraordinarily high level in the country, and now they just weren't that good of a team this year, in the same way that Alabama was the team and now Georgia's the team. Like, these things change over time, and they can change very, very quickly. And I think people treat them, when you're in a moment, you feel like that moment is going to last forever until it doesn't.
As a reminder, that down was they finished 22nd in the polls. UW once went 0-12 in the season. So there's a lot further down to go. A lot further down to go.
Clemson went from being a fine program to being the number 2 program in the country, football-wise.
Yeah.
And now they're not.
All right, some UW news. Pete Thamel, my ESPN colleague, reported that Jalen Polk is declaring for the NFL draft. Despite playing 4 years in college, Polk actually had 2 years of eligibility remaining due to both the COVID season and an injury redshirt in 2021.
Run it back, Jalen.
At UW. But no surprise he's heading to the NFL after he broke out with 69 catches for 1,159 yards, 9 touchdowns, plus a rushing touchdown this season. I To me, I think Jalen Polk is an example that Kalen DeBoer can really use in recruiting transfers. This is somebody who came from Texas Tech without a lot of hype. Like I remember we talked about him a lot, largely because this happened during the depths of COVID, if I recall correctly, and develops into someone who, I think has a pretty good shot of going on the first 2 days of the NFL draft.
Absolutely.
On3.com reported that backup cornerback Javion Green has submitted his notification to transfer. Green played as a true freshman in 2022 and then saw action in every game this season, but was below other returning players on the cornerback depth chart. So not a terribly surprising move here. So I mentioned a couple of incoming transfers that we have not yet talked about. Cal wide receiver Jeremiah Hunter is one of the players who will be called on to, step up with Jalen Polk headed to the NFL. Obviously, Roma Dunze hasn't declared yet, but he's gone. And we'll see what happens with Jalen McMillan, whether he decides to utilize his injury redshirt. You've got Giles Jackson coming back, Jeremy Bernard in a bigger role, Denzel Boston, but Jeremiah Hunter, I should say, is going to be a big part of this as well. In his final year of eligibility, had at least 60 catches each of the last 2 years, averaged 16.1 yards per reception in 2022 when he nearly hit 1,000 yards, just 11.6 this year as part of a weak Cal offense. Obviously, he'll be in a better situation, I think, coming to UW. Did have a career high 7 touchdowns, one of which came at UW as part of a 5-catch for 85-yard game against the Huskies.
I think this is an awesome pickup.
Yeah.
For them. I mean, he's going to contribute right away. And then I don't know if you've seen Silas Bolden also from Morgan State. Oh my God, would it be nice to get him?
He's visiting the Huskies among several other power schools, so we'll see on that one. And then tight end Trey Watson, who was originally recruited to Fresno State by Kalen DeBoer, also has 1 year of eligibility remaining. Had a career high 38 catches for 378 yards, 4 TDs last year. This is a position where the Huskies are going to lose, their 2 top players in Devin Culp and Jack Westover. Have again some young guys. Josh Cuevas got a surprising target during the second half last night that he was hit during and couldn't come down with. They've got Ryan Otten, younger brother of Cade, in the mix there. Quentin Moore, who had the big touchdown against Oregon, but a good position, I think, to add some additional depth and certainly experience at the FBS level. And then the other bit of transfer news is that Dylan Morris is headed to James Madison, according to 247sports.com. Dukes went 11-1 under Kurt Cignetti last year, earning Cignetti the Indiana job. They hired Bob Chisney from Holy Cross as a replacement, and their quarterback, Jordan McLeod, has submitted a notification of transfer. So an opportunity for Morris to go in and start there for a team that, well, it's not in a Power 5 conference, certainly was competing at a high level this season.
I thought this was an awesome one for Dylan Morris. I was stoked to see him go there.
Yeah.
He's going to be playing in big games this year.
It's going to be interesting to see. They played in the Armed Forces Bowl, lost that one to Air Force without their coach, and presumably
can't really compete with Air Force in that one.
Presumably without their quarterback as well, as given the fact that he's planning to transfer. I know Jordan McLeod did play in that one. He went 20 of 33 for 257 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Really?
But the Air Force rushing attack was too much. 35 carries for 203 yards for Emmanuel Michel. Gotta love that option.
Sounds about right. Yeah, I think the transfer portal in general, like you were talking about Jalen Polk, just thinking about all the players who, it was funny, like we knew Dylan Johnson would be a factor this year, but also he didn't go into the season as the number 1 starting running back. And how you can go
until Cam Davis was injured. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. The Cam Davis injury, all of a sudden he became way more important. But like, you can go from, I don't want to say Dylan Morris or Dylan Johnson was just a guy, but like, he wasn't expected to be a huge impact player, to all of a sudden we're in the national championship game being like, the Huskies offense is affected by not having him. So I mean,
here's a stat. Dylan Johnson ran for nearly as many yards this season at Washington, obviously taking advantage of the extended season, as he did in 3 years at Mississippi State.
Also, like, just such a different scheme too, but
I mean, his per carry average was similar. He just didn't have that many opportunities necessarily at Mississippi State, whereas he became the guy for UW after that Davis injury.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking about. Like a lot of how players play has to do with situation and opportunity. It's not purely about talent. It's a lot of situation and opportunity and coaching and scheme. And that's to me why I think I look at somebody like Will Rogers maybe a little bit more favorably and just go into it with, I mean, at this point, all we can really have is just confidence in Kalen DeBoer. But like his situation and the opportunities that he was having, and he's definitely having the opportunity to throw the ball a lot at Mississippi State, but just such a totally different offense that he was working in and such totally different skill talent around him that all of a sudden coming to UW could look very, very different, and how he plays could look very, very different. I mean, the same with, we liked Michael Penix. We were feeling good about Michael Penix. I don't think we thought to ourselves, Michael Penix is going to lead this team to the national championship game.
He's
So
gonna no, I didn't think he's gonna finish runner up in Heisman voting.
there are a lot of things that happen in the transfer portal. And with recruits, it feels a little bit different because recruits, it takes way more time. But like, there are a lot of things that happen in the transfer portal that it's just really, really hard to predict because we just don't have the situation. We don't had seen these players in that many different situations, and that's a lot of what college is about. So uh, I'm excited to see all of them. I think that UW has gone out and gotten a lot of experience and a lot of experience in important places, and I do think that they're going to be able to. Maybe they won't be competing for the Natty again, but I wouldn't be shocked if they were competing for a playoff spot next year, given the talent coming back, given the players that are coming in through the portal.
Oh no, I wouldn't be shocked either. I mean, I haven't looked at any of the too early rankings for 2024, but I'm sure they're in the
They're
top
like,
25.
yeah, they're in the like 15 range.
Yeah,
It'd be like
well,
right outside of
yeah, 12 teams make the playoffs. So yeah, if you're
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
15th,
It's
you've
right
got a decent
outside of the
shot.
playoff. Yeah.
ESPN has us 11th. So yeah,
I mean, I think UW's probably being slightly overrated, maybe even just as a byproduct of how good they've done this year. But at the same time, like, this is a roster that, I mean, a lot of the roster is, we didn't expect Rome Odunze to be a top, he's basically guaranteed to be a top 15 pick in the draft, let's say. And
I like that you
I think
chose
we
right
liked,
before the Seahawks pick.
I mean, it's kind of just an arbitrary number, but like, I don't think that's what we thought Rome Odunze's future was when he was here with Jimmy Lake. We didn't really think that much about Rome Odunze at all. So
We also did not think that Puka Nacua was going to become the best rookie receiver in NFL history.
I feel like that's one of my all-time L's, is not believing in Puka Nacua after the first game. Didn't we make a bet about that?
Did we? I may have to
think-
review the tape.
I think we might have made a bet about Puka Nacua, and I guarantee you I lost. because I definitely did not believe that Puka Nacua was going to be. But I don't know. That's the thing. It's really hard to predict how talent is going to be in college sports.
I believe what you mean is it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future.
So
Can I tell you good news about playing in the national championship game?
What is that?
It's that much less time until the start of next season.
There we go.
All right, I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Again, we will have the State of the Seahawks podcast at the end of the 2023 season. We have not set a time, locked in a time yet with Ben Baldwin, but I'm anticipating having that out early next week. And again, if you haven't, check out our post-game podcast from after the College Football Playoff Championship and enjoy us rationalizing. On that note,
thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Enjoy us rationalizing.